So good afternoon. Welcome to the April 15th noon Project Homekey 2.0 info session. I'm Andrew, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague at the County of Marin, Karis.
Welcome. My name is Karis, and I work for Marin County Health and Human Services. I'm acting director for our whole person care program, and I'm really happy that you could join us today to talk about Project Homekey. You might have heard about it. If you have, or if you haven't, don't worry. We're going to talk you through it today. So that's what's happening. The first round of Project Homekey actually started last summer, and Marin County was able to successfully compete and purchase 2 properties. One of them is in Corte, Madera, and the other one is in San Rafael. And both of those are starting off as interim housing initially, but we will be converting them to permanent supportive housing over the next little bit. And they will turn into, between the 2 of them, we'll have 66 new units of permanent supportive housing. And you might hear us talk about permanent supportive housing in this presentation. It's really just what it sounds like. It's a home that you can stay in as long as you need to or want to, and it comes with support. So that's what permanent supportive housing is. So in terms of Project Homekey, the governor has requested a new round of funding, this time $750 million. And we don't know yet if it will be approved by the legislature, but just in case it is, we're trying to get a head start here in Marin, and that's why we're meeting with you. And thank you for coming out to talk about it with us. So backing up a little bit, the last time we did a full count in January 2019, we had over 1,000 Marin residents who were experiencing homelessness. And basically Project Homekey is a program to give us the chance to find that key component that they need in their lives, which is a home, a place to call their home. And this, we're talking about in terms of units of housing. And you may be here today in part because you've noticed during the pandemic or just in modern life an increase in the people that you see out and about as you go about your daily life who are experiencing homelessness. We are aware of this too and concerned about it. However, we want you to know that the majority of folks that you see outside experiencing homelessness in Marin have been in Marin experiencing homelessness for quite some time, and they're people who are familiar to us. Some of them have disabilities and need a permanent home combined with this type of support services. So Project Homekey is a great way to make a dent in that problem of people lacking a home. So that's what we want to discuss with you, how we might use this funding opportunity in Marin. And a little bit more background. Marin was one of the only counties in California to reduce chronic homelessness between 2017 and 2019. And over the past year, we've actually accelerated our success in finding homes, permanent supportive homes for people experiencing homelessness. And we're pretty happy about that result because it's a big lift during the pandemic, but so important, more now so than ever. So here's how we're doing it. In 2015, our system in Marin had only 193 of these units or homes that qualify as permanent supportive housing. But by January of 2020, we were up to 514 units of permanent supportive housing, and we've added 75 more through the use of federal mainstream vouchers in 2020. So now we're up to actually 589 permanent supportive housing units. So that's kind of incredible, especially compared to the efforts that other communities are making. Everyone is trying to work on this, but we're really, to go from 193 units to 589 units in just 6 years, we're feeling very grateful for our community supporting us in this work. So part of how we did this was by launching Whole Person Care. That's the program that I'm acting director for. And we provide intensive client-focused case management services. And the Whole Person Care also brings all the homeless service providers together so that we're all rowing in the same direction. And luckily, we have an incredibly innovative housing authority who is a super close partner with us in this work as well. We couldn't do this without them. So for the bulk of the presentation today, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Henning. Andrew is with Opening Doors, and Opening Doors is a private and public partnership of funders and policymakers from across Marin dedicated to ending chronic and veteran homelessness. And Andrew is the organization's project director. So over to you, Andrew.
Perfect. Thank you, Karis. So I'm going to load a presentation here. Actually, hold on. Let me reshare this so I can we have a video clip. I want to make sure it's optimized. Or wait, hold on. Sorry, one more time. Here we go. There we go. Okay. So thank you everyone again for joining. As Kara said, I'm Andrew Henning. I am the project director for Opening Doors Marin. And here's my contact information as well as Karis's. Karis, maybe if you want to drop our emails in the chat, if people have other questions or comments and you don't feel comfortable asking them today, feel free to reach out to us directly. We're happy to field any questions or concerns or comments that come up. A few quick housekeeping items. All sessions are being recorded, so it's being recorded right now. So I just want to give everyone a heads up about that. Following the presentation, we'll be answering questions from the chat. We're not going to be doing a live Q&A, but we'll be answering questions from the chat. We'll also be saving the chat. So just if anyone has questions in the future, we'll be saving the chat. And then also following the presentation, we have a link to a feedback survey. So we want to get your input today about what we're presenting in Homekey 2.0. So we'll be providing that at the end of the presentation. And then I also just want to say, I already saw some of the questions in the chat. We're happy to briefly maybe touch on some of them, but I really just wanted to say, we're really focused on Project Homekey 2.0. We are going to talk briefly in a moment just about homelessness, and I'll add to some of the stuff that Karis mentioned, but today's meeting is really focused on Project Homekey, not homelessness overall and the strategy overall. I think this is unlikely at this point, but I did just want to say if we get quote unquote Zoom bombed at some point during the session, I will end the session and then I have everyone's email address from the Eventbrite registration and I can follow up and we can find another time to meet. And then lastly, the County of Marin has a fantastic website, marincounty.org/main/homekey, where they have a lot more information about Project Homekey 1.0, as well as it's getting updated for Project Homekey 2.0. And there's a lot of FAQs and great information there. In terms of the agenda, so we've been welcoming and doing introductions. We're going to touch briefly, as I said, on homelessness in Marin, and then we're going to spend most of the presentation talking about Homekey, and I'll also talk a little bit about what Opening Doors is. And then the final part of the presentation, we've been ending around 12:30 or so after the presentation, or after about 30 minutes, we'll have time for Q&A for any questions you have about the project. So homelessness in Marin. So Karis did a great job kind of giving you a high level overview of this. And I also have a 45-minute presentation that I could give. And so I want to give you the truncated, abridged 5-minute version here. So basically a lot of our systems change effort began in 2016. And there's a lot of background and reasons why, but the core insight was that at that time we realized most of our challenges from homelessness, particularly unsheltered homelessness, were stemming from a small group of people experiencing what's called chronic homelessness. And that's basically long-term homelessness accompanied by some sort of disabling condition. And if you were to think about everyone who's experiencing homelessness at a given moment, the vast majority of people are actually homeless for a very brief period of time, a few weeks, a few months, and then they're able to resolve their homelessness. But on the other end of the spectrum, people that are long-term chronically homeless can be homeless for years, if not decades in some cases. And the cost on public services, whether that be EMS transports, criminal justice, other healthcare utilization, can be quite substantial. A lot of studies, even locally, have shown that the per capita cost of chronic homelessness can be upwards of $60,000 per year in public services. And at the same time, just morally and ethically, this is also the most vulnerable group of people experiencing homelessness. Studies have found that people experiencing chronic homelessness pass away on average 25 years earlier than their housed peers, not from an acute night of cold or other events like that, but instead long-term chronic health issues. And that's really what Karis's team is focused on, is this whole person care approach to really helping people that are high healthcare utilizers. So what we realized in 2016 was that though we had a lot of great services and programs in Marin, a lot of our historical focus was on this part of the curve. We weren't really addressing chronic homelessness in a meaningful way. So we hit the road. We took our elected leaders, our service providers, and we went up to Sonoma County, down to the South Bay, to the East Bay. And through this process, we learned a lot about how other communities were trying to address chronic homelessness and long-term homelessness. And we learned about a lot of interesting programs. And at the same time, Howard Schwartz, who's actually also now on the whole person care team with the county, In those early days, we did a systems map of the lived experience of people that were homeless and people that were chronically homeless specifically. And if you see here, if homelessness is designated in the middle and housing is on the outside, we had created a very convoluted system where it was very difficult for people that were living on the street to get to the resource that they really needed, which is housing. And so one of the things that we recognized was that unintentionally over the years, we had created a dynamic where we had inherently challenging folks to serve. And this might have been because of very intense behavioral health challenges, chronic health issues, traumatic brain injuries, often many of these conditions at the same time. We had created programs that had certain, again, unintended barriers, but people were failing out of our programs. They were becoming more distrustful. They didn't seek help, and then their situation got worse. And so we've literally at this point housed people that in some cases had been homeless in Marin for 30, even 40 years, stuck in this cycle that wasn't working for us, and it certainly wasn't working for them. So what we realized is that through all the field trips is that we didn't need just another program to address, let's say, behavioral health. We needed a whole new process for prioritizing the most vulnerable. And so one program that we discovered in San Mateo County and replicated here was called the Homeless Outreach Team. And that's actually now been named a statewide best practice by the League of California Cities. And the idea was basically that we brought together local service providers, the city, the county, and this program in its early pilot days was focused in downtown San Rafael. And we came together on a biweekly basis and we really worked off a list of these are the dozen or so most visible, vulnerable people that are homeless in San Rafael. How do we get them permanently housed? And what we realized is that the easiest path was to just take them directly from the street, wrap them in intensive support services, and put them into housing. We're not trying to manage homelessness, we're trying to end homelessness. And in the first 18 months of that effort, our kind of theory that this might make a difference actually paid off. We housed 23 of the most visible, vulnerable, chronically homeless people in San Rafael. And that led us in 2017, in fact, October 1st of 2017, to really trying to roll this strategy out countywide. And there's a lot more information about this change, but I did want to direct people, if they're interested, to this Built for Zero movement that Marin County has now joined. It is a movement across the entire country, and I think our trash is coming. So if you hear background noise, I apologize for that. But Built for Zero is a national movement of now over 80 communities in the United States and Canada that are using this by name list methodology to get people permanently off the street and helping communities actually measurably end chronic and veteran homelessness. So Kara's touched on this a bit, but I just wanted to add to this the impact of this effort to date, which is basically that, as Kara said, from 2017 to 2019, we saw an almost 30% reduction in chronic homelessness. And a lot of it was because we were increasing our permanent supportive housing at the same time. So those numbers were very highly correlated. Since October 1st of 2017, we've now housed over 320 of the most vulnerable chronically homeless people in Marin County. This one stat is slightly out of date. Our retention rate is currently 94%, but that's still, when you think about over 300 of the most vulnerable people in our community that have been housed, we've had incredible success keeping them housed. And the result, as we kind of hypothesized in the beginning, was that at least data we have from San Rafael is that pre-housing and then after housing, we've seen major reductions in criminal justice utilization or intervention, as well as, of course, healthcare intervention as well. Now, the key question, how have we done this? So the big thing that we've done is we've had an amazing partnership with Marin Housing Authority. So Marin Housing Authority has committed a good portion of our county's Section 8 housing vouchers to this effort because the county, also to their credit, has committed service dollars to support people in their housing. And so probably 80% of the people that we've housed are actually in scattered site apartments and rental units all across the county, from Mill Valley to Novato, Larkspur to Inverness. And so this is really kind of speaking to the fact that a lot of these people are already in the community, living among people. No one really knows that they're there because they're doing great. They're in housing and they have the support that they need. And that really is the goal. But rental units alone are not going to be enough. And we've really been trying to work to create more actual physical housing units. And our fruits of many years of labor are kind of paying off. There was the Victory Village Senior Housing Project in Fairfax. we carved out some of those units for our folks as permanent supportive housing. Homeward Bound right now is rebuilding the Mill Street Center in San Rafael to create 32 more units of permanent supportive housing. And so really that takes us perfectly to opening doors. So opening doors began as what we called the Marin Chronic Homeless Action Task Force. So in the early days when I was with the city of San Rafael, we formed this working group that we called MChat, which was really about bringing together all these different partners and asking the question, how can we accelerate our progress with the HOT program? So as I mentioned, this was kind of the timing of when we launched the HOT team. So we brought together like I said, the county, different cities, the faith-based community, the business community, philanthropy, and we really began what was essentially a 2-year education campaign to get everyone updated on Built for Zero, on Housing First, on these key concepts and programs that we had been piloting. And what our group realized was that the biggest value add, especially for housing, was coming up with more local capital. And what I mean by that is basically more local money to buy housing. Even for being a very affluent community, we actually don't have a lot of flexible funding that we can use for housing acquisition. And so that really is when MChat went from being just this loose collection to becoming a 501c3 fiscally sponsored organization under the Center for Volunteer Nonprofit Leadership. And in 2019, Opening Doors spent almost the entirety of that year exploring the feasibility of a public revenue measure for affordable housing. This is something that neighboring counties have passed, some to the tune of almost $1 billion. And so that was something that we were looking at locally, because really that gives us the local control that I know is important to our residents to be able to decide what are the projects that we want to pursue and where. Ultimately, we did not have the political, the polling did not suggest that we had the political support to pass something like a bond. So in 2020, we repositioned our approach to getting more local capital by coming up with what we're calling our community business plan. So using the data that we have about homelessness in our community, we've actually been able to project out, and we're trying to project out, what do we actually need to be able to end homelessness in our community, and then looking to private fundraising, regional philanthropy to actually make that happen. And that was the plan, at least the first couple of months of 2020 until COVID, and that takes us to Homekey. I did want to say, if you're interested in learning more about kind of opening doors, this public-private model, a lot of our inspiration has been drawn from an organization called Destination Home that's based in Santa Clara County. They are probably 10 years ahead of us of where we are, but that's an organization that has really brought together money from the tech sector. They helped lead one of the public revenue campaigns in Santa Clara County. And like us, they're very focused on ending chronic homelessness, having better data and measurements around this. So it's an interesting model if you want to learn more. So Homekey 1.0. So in order to talk about Homekey, we actually need to talk about another confusingly named program called Project Roomkey. So after shelter in place began in March of 2020, because of a lot of the underlying health issues I talked about earlier among the homeless community, the state said, very quickly, we need to do something to get people that are experiencing homelessness off the street. And rather than trying to create congregate shelter, which is basically, you can imagine a big room with a lot of cots and beds, that's kind of the worst environment for COVID. They wanted communities to be able to rapidly lease hotel and motel rooms to be able to create more capacity for people to stay. And so through this program, which again launched in April of 2020, almost 22,000 people were served and were able to rapidly get off the street into a safer environment. And there was almost complete statewide participation in this program. Based on that success, by June, and you'll hear this theme coming up, that this is a very rapid program, but by June, the state realized that this approach was actually very successful at getting people off the street rapidly. And so they repurposed federal money, $750 million from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, to actually go towards the permanent acquisition of really kind of any type of building, hotels, motels, commercial sites, to serve as permanent housing for people experiencing homelessness. So this was announced in June. The notice of funding availability came out on July 16th, and applications were due less than a month later. So it was an extremely rapid turnaround, with an added caveat that the state wanted local communities to actually close escrow on a purchase by the end of the calendar year, and then have those sites operational, at least 50% operational within 90 days. And even despite these constraints, statewide, almost 6,000 units were created, serving over 9,000 people. And when you think about the fact that there are 150,000 people experiencing homelessness in California, programs like this really do make a big difference. In Marin, as Karis mentioned, we were able to secure 2 sites. One is 3301 Kerner, which was an office building in San Rafael. And then the other is was a former hotel in Corte Madera, which is now being called the Casa Buena. It's on Casa Buena Drive next to Marin Joe's. And so these were our 2 local projects in Marin that we successfully funded. And I wanted to show you this quick video. So I just want to acknowledge up front, both the timing of this project and just, the nature of the project. These can be typically projects that we would take many years to get community input, buy-in, feedback, modify as needed, but the state guidelines did not permit that. And as a result, understandably, there was a lot of concern from community members about what is the impact of this going to be. And so to the credit of the town of Corte Madera, they have convened basically a citizen advisory committee that is serving sort of an oversight function over the Corte Madera project. And Opening Doors is actually helping to facilitate that group. And so that group has been looking at things like exterior redesign, communication with the community, success metrics, volunteerism. And one of the things that they've done is that group has put together a virtual ribbon cutting video. And so I wanted to show you this video because I think it really speaks to the fact that even though there can be concerns about these sites, within a very short period of time, they can also be embraced, as you'll see. So I'll go ahead and play this video now.
On behalf of Corte Madera's elected officials, staff, and residents, I'd like to welcome you to the Casa Buena, Corte Madera's first permanent supportive housing for those that experience homelessness. This was all brought together by a collaborative effort that included the County of Marin, Catholic Charities, Open Door Marin, town staff, and Corte Madera residents, who are also providing monetary and in-kind donations.
Marin has worked very hard over the past 3 years to address our homeless population. And with the Homekey project in Corte Madera at Casa Buena, we will be able to provide needed housing for 18 of our most vulnerable residents while wrapping all the services the county has to offer around them. I want to thank the community of Corte Madera, their city council, and the Casa Buena steering committee for working with the county to make this possible.
When I first heard of plans to build a homeless shelter in Corte Madera, I was very much opposed to it. It wasn't until I did a bunch of research on my own that I began to realize that permanent supportive housing can be an important solution to the homeless issue we have here in Marin County.
A safe home helps transform lives and creates essential stability, healing, independence, and dignity founded on hope. Our partnership with Marin County through Project Roomkey and Homekey impacts many lives. Together, we strive to end homelessness in Marin.
From Corte Madera to Novato, Larkspur to Inverness, we have successfully housed hundreds of our community's most vulnerable chronically homeless people. Because of projects like this and the support of community members like you, I know we can reach our goal of being the first county in the Bay Area to end chronic homelessness.
One of the ideas we had was to create welcome baskets that could be given to each new resident when they move in. So we sent people shopping for everything from toothpaste to shampoo to snacks, cozy slippers, and grocery store gift cards. And the response from the community was frankly overwhelming. So many people wanted to be a part of this. It really embodies the spirit of Corte Madera as a welcoming place.
So on behalf of Corte Madera, I'd like to welcome our newest residents.
Welcome
So I hope you enjoyed that video. I especially love Leela's kids at the end, but yeah, I just wanted to say again, as I mentioned, and I think Scott said it himself in the video, and I'm glad we now have him on tape, I guess. But, Scott was one of those people that was very nervous. He, as a resident nearby, was very nervous about this project. And we have really tried to use this committee to provide that kind of ability to have a more transparent understanding of the operations of this site, to have a hand in how the programming works and what it looks like in the future. And so that group, for what it's worth, I wanted to share because this has been a question in some of our info sessions so far. That group really sees itself as being a possible model for future communities that might do Project Homekey, that might do future permanent supportive housing, both here in Marin and honestly across the region and the country, because it seems to really be working. So with that, I'm going to segue to Project Homekey 2.0. And what's important is that at this point, there actually is no official Project Homekey 2.0. So as Karis mentioned, at this point, the governor has proposed a Project Homekey 2.0 for $750 million, just like last time in this year's or this upcoming budget. The legislature has not taken action yet. So again, it's not an approved program, but we expect that there could be a possible vote very soon, even as early as next month. And because of that, that's really why we're doing these info sessions. Is last time, as I shared with the timeline, it was such a rapid turnaround. It was very difficult for us to even find projects within less than a month, let alone do this kind of community outreach and engagement. So whatever happens, we want to do this now so that we're prepared and not on our heels and in a situation where the community doesn't feel like they had any voice in this. So that's really the vision behind this and the goal of this. And again, we're also assuming, given that there aren't any parameters yet for Homekey 2.0, that they're going to be very similar to 1.0. So based on that, assume state criteria. So based on last time, governmental agencies need to be the lead applicant. So cities, counties, housing authorities can apply for funding. There can be other partners like nonprofit service partners, nonprofit housing developers, but a government entity needs to lead the charge on actually applying. So that was how it worked last time. Like last time, the funding is likely to be very flexible. It could be used for hotels, motels, commercial buildings. I know there's been some advocacy from Southern Marin to include marina slips or boats or other ideas. I think even some of the Homekey projects from across the state included acquiring trailers or other things. So there's a lot of ways that the funding can be used. The key is that whatever is being purchased must be purchased by the end of the calendar year. So we're anticipating that's the same case now. Whenever this comes out, May, June, July, August, the state is going to want us to close escrow by the end of the calendar year. Additionally, we're also anticipating that at least 50% of the project must be occupied within 90 days of acquisition, same as last time. And then finally is this local funding match, which I hadn't discussed before, but is actually very important to the criteria for projects. And so I wanted to actually break this out in more detail. So the way that the Homekey funding works is that it's on a per unit acquisition cost basis. So whatever the per unit acquisition cost is, that's the basis for the subsidy. So for the first $100,000, the state fully covers the cost. So $100,000 fully covered by the state. From $100,000 to $200,000, it's a 1-to-1 match state to local. So $50,000 from the state, $50,000 locally. And lastly, $200,000 to $350,000, it's a 1-to-2 match. So the state covers 50, we would cover 100. And that doesn't mean that we couldn't have projects that are more costly than $350,000 per unit. It just means that we would have to have 100% of the contribution above that at a local level. Now that's important because, as you can tell in this hypothetical example, the cost per unit makes a huge difference on the local match requirement. So for a 50 unit project costing $200,000, the state would cover $7.5 million of that, and then we would cover $2.5 million. If the project per unit cost went up to by even $90,000, it changes to $180,000 per unit from the state, or $9 million, but $110,000 locally, so $5.5 million from us. And as I said at the beginning about opening doors, our challenge locally is that we simply do not have money like that. I mean, that's why Homekey itself is so critical, because we don't have 7.5 million. We don't have $9 million laying around for housing. And even the local match can be very difficult for us, even with this level of subsidy. So that's why the financials of these projects is very important, as I'll talk a little bit about in a second. So right now, basically this process that we're going through and where we want to get your feedback, we have a survey, as I mentioned, that we'll be getting more feedback, is we're really trying to draft the local criteria for what kind of projects would we apply for. So first and foremost, we're looking for projects that are not in areas of concentrated poverty. And the reason that is important is twofold. One is just, I think, morally, ethically, we cannot keep putting low-income housing in already low-income areas. We need to make sure that our housing from a fair housing perspective and an equity basis is really county-wide. I mean, that really is how people are gonna lift themselves out of poverty, is by having housing that's county-wide. So that's the number one reason. The second reason is also financial. Because of this concern about fair housing and equity, the federal government is not allowing housing authorities to invest more housing vouchers in areas of concentrated poverty. So what that means is that when we finance a lot of these projects, we put Section 8 vouchers attached to the unit. That doesn't mean the housing's free. Someone that lives in those units would put 30% of their income towards housing, but the voucher covers the rest up to market rent. And that allows for these projects to have operational funding. So maintenance, property management, all the things that we would want from one of these projects. And it also helps pay for the services. So that way people are successful in the housing. So we can't have those kind of financing models in areas of concentrated poverty. So that's a very important, just right out of the gate, caveat. Number two, like Homekey 1.0, is we also don't want to, as I said, crowd all these projects into one community. We really want to have multiple communities be able to step up and provide an option for this housing. And so we would be looking for hopefully another portfolio of countywide projects that we could apply for. Number three, and again, this goes back to the financing, is this time around, we really need participation from nonprofit developers. On one hand, I do want to give a big shout out to the county, because one of our challenges has been ownership of these units. And the county was willing to step up and provide ownership of the Homekey 1.0 sites, but that's a very difficult process and is ultimately better done at the outset by a nonprofit developer. So in talking to nonprofit developers, their typical minimum number of units is pretty substantial. It's closer to 40, 45, even 50 units. I don't want to just make a blanket statement now that if a project's lower than 45 units, we can't do it, because every site's a little bit different, but that is very key. And one of the key reasons is that Homekey provides acquisition funding, but a lot of these sites like hotels, motels, commercial buildings need rehab after they've been purchased. And so nonprofit developers are able to leverage something called low-income tax credits to bring financing to the table to pay for the rehab that happens later. So that's why it's very important that we have them at the table, because we don't have otherwise that money that we can access for rehab. So in light of that, I mean, really as a upper limit, we're looking for projects under $350,000, but ideally less than $250,000 per unit. And then the last piece is we really are not looking for projects that are in the middle of nowhere. We're looking for projects that are integrated in the community. They're near groceries, grocery stores, transit, healthcare. And this isn't just us. This is also a state, in the state application for Homekey 1.0, there were points awarded for proximity to services. And that's how the projects that were from Homekey 1.0 were also configured. So that's the draft local criteria that we have right now for Homekey 2.0. So what's next? So Opening Doors, in conjunction with the county, are hosting at least 10 info sessions about this new process. All of these sessions are going to be recorded and put online so you can watch later or share with your network. The county is also in the process of, they're going to be releasing what's called a request for interest, which goes out to property owners and would basically see, people are actually interested in selling. There's also been other conversations. Opening Doors, for example, has been reaching out, trying to find projects. We already have a housing acquisition group based out of Marin Community Foundation and other local philanthropic partners that has a queue of projects that we're always considering and looking at. So we're basically just trying to get ideas for projects at this point. Once projects are starting to roll in, with community input, like I've been describing, as well as, actual just due diligence. Is the property for sale? Could it be occupied, within a year at this point? So doing that basic due diligence around the projects that come in, we're then hoping to then be prepared to submit applications, again, maybe as early as May, who knows? So I've mentioned a survey a couple times. I'm about to show the link. I'm not going to leave it up because it's kind of a little bit complicated. So maybe I'll copy it, Karis, and then I'll drop it in the chat as we go to the Q&A. But basically, we're asking folks, just for your name, where you're based, and then general feedback on the criteria I've described, factors that would lead to you supporting a Homekey project in your community, and factors that might lead you to opposing that, because I think that's helpful for us to know what are things that get you excited and what are things that give you pause. And then, as I mentioned, there's a space for actually submitting project ideas. So here's the link. I tried to cut it down from a very long link, but it's still a little bit too long. So with that concludes the presentation part. So I see it looks like we've got a number of questions and chat comments. I can't see them because I'm screen sharing, but I'm going to stop that now and share the link. And then maybe Karis, if you want to get us started with the Q&A, we'll go from there.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on the Q&A, and there's also questions in the chat too. So feel free to keep adding questions as we go. The first question was, what time period is that 94% retention over? And that's since we started this system reorganization in 2017. So that one I can answer. And then the next one that's in the Q&A is there a process in Novato to overcome the kinds of pushback that prevented Homekey 1.0 from going forward? And I think I'll let Andrew.
That briefly. Yeah. So I think the big thing is, I guess a couple things worth noting. One is that I think a big thing that we heard in all the communities, this wasn't just Novato, was that there was major concern about just the speed and the ability for the community to provide input. And so what we're doing right now is a big part of a learning from Homekey 1.0, that we really want to be proactive about this kind of public engagement on the front end. So that's a big part of it. In addition to these info sessions, the city council for Novato has actually agendized basically the same presentation for that council later this month and for the broader Novato community. So we're hoping that by getting a lot of input on the front end, we can hope to build more support and buy-in as we go. The second thing is, and just it's worth noting, is that the Homekey legislation basically created a lot of kind of once in maybe a generation exemptions to land use. So basically it allowed for projects for any Homekey project to basically comply with the whatever the underlying zoning was, even if it was, let's say, commercial, industrial, it would automatically qualify for housing. And so in Homekey 1.0, the county was the main applicant. And so ultimately it was a county decision of whether or not to pursue these projects. But we want to be able to, again, work with cities and towns, like basically what's happened with Corte Madera, and even in Homekey 1.0 with San Rafael, where San Rafael actually contributed financially to the purchase of 3301 Kerner. So again, we want to have whoever the lead applicant is, whether it's the county or even a city or town itself, we want to work together to make sure that everyone's bought in and we can try to make this program a success. Anything you'd want to add, Karis, or?
No, I mean, I think thank you for being here today. That's part of your great questions and your great feedback, and then you're talking with your community are part of this too. So thank you for that. We have a couple other questions in the Q&A. The next one is, the last line in the FAQ on the county website for Project Homekey says, our goal is to end chronic and veteran homelessness in Marin County by the end of 2022. And the question is this still achievable? And why don't I take a first pass at this, and then Andrew, you can chime in.
Sure.
We are working forward as if it is. So we are, our business plan to end chronic homelessness is going off the point in time count that was done of people who are visible on the streets on a specific night in 2019. And we weren't able to do 2018, right? Was the last point?
2019. No, that was
2019. Right. Okay, sorry. 2019 was our last point in time count in January. So that was the last time that we were able to do this count, which is known to be an undercount, but it allows us to look at change over time because we use the same methodology every 2 years when we do it. we are expecting that there probably will unfortunately be a rise in people experiencing homelessness, partly due to the loss of income and other societal upheaval due to COVID, even with the benefits of rental assistance and eviction protections and other things that are being done to try to keep people in their homes and in their jobs. We do know that it is likely that homelessness will increase. We have increased our rate of housing people during COVID, which is kind of incredible. So if the denominator we were working on stayed the same, I think we would be pretty well on track, but the goalpost may be shifting. So Andrew, do you want to add to that?
No, honestly, I think that that's right. I mean, I think we really still are trying to act as though that is achievable. I mean, at least in terms of veteran homelessness, we are getting very close. We're in double digits for the number of veterans that are homeless in Marin, and that's been a major priority. And so with chronic homelessness, I mean, I think what's so dynamic about this situation, honestly, is that with Homekey, I mean, like the last Homekey, I mean, that was out of nowhere, 60 some new units of housing. There's talk at a federal level about rolling out more housing vouchers for people experiencing homelessness. So we really are acting as though that is our goal. And there are a lot of factors that are outside of our control, especially at a federal level in terms of resources and at the state. But we want to act with that urgency because I think that's really going to keep us, driving to accelerate and increase our monthly outflow into housing. So that is the goal.
Great. And next I'm going to combine a question from the Q&A and a question from the chat because they have some similarity. People are asking if Project Homekey 2.0 can be used to do legalized camping or a safe parking program. This was mentioned on KQED's forum this morning. And someone else is asking about if it could be used for tiny homes or other creative housing and the land that would be built on. Or is it really only to purchase existing buildings?
That's a really good question. And my understanding is that the important piece of this is that the eventual housing needs to be permanent. So the issue, I think, with a safe camping or our safe parking program is that wouldn't necessarily be long-term. I think what is a little bit different, though, is if talking about the tiny homes or other types of projects, that definitely could be long-term. And so that could be a way to use the money. Again, we're going to have to see when the Homekey 2.0 actual funding notice comes out to see how it's been maybe shifted to allow for the purchase of tiny homes or the purchase of land and then tiny homes. The other important caveat there is that we would also need to be able to demonstrate to the state that, if we, let's say, found a parking lot somewhere that could do tiny homes, that we could purchase the site, buy the tiny homes, install the tiny homes, move people in within the 90 days. So it's not to say that that's not impossible. It is possible. So it's just a question of, what is that site, what's feasible at that site, and the possible cost.
Great. So then there are two questions I'm going to combine about services. One person was asking who's the case manager at Casa Buena, and it is Catholic Charities that's the service provider there. And then someone else is asking, on the services side, do Catholic Charities or other providers of support have capacity to support additional units that would be purchased? And this is such an important question because the supportive part of permanent supportive housing is crucial, and it's why we have that amazing retention rate. People really do need this kind of support who are among those most vulnerable chronically homeless individuals. So we would be, I think we would be putting it out for bid to see who in the community did have capacity to provide that. We have a number of different service providers that we work with in Marin County, so we're really lucky. We have a diversity of options, and we believe that there would be resources made available. In other words, there would be capacity made available to respond.
And I think the other thing too, just as we're, again, this kind of like due diligence phase that we're in, we also want to work with those providers to make sure, just like the nonprofit developers and our funders, it's really going to take a kind of a team effort to make sure that the program is going to actually work out. So that's something that we want to make sure that we're doing on the front end.
Great. And then another question that came in the chat was, what's the funding to keep someone to pay the cost of someone living there, especially if they're unable to work? So it's great. Let's say we get someone moved in to one of our sites. How are they able to stay there? Andrew, do you want to talk about that?
I can talk about that. So I think I kind of mentioned this, but our goal with these units is really to try to project-based housing vouchers with the rooms. So that's a strategy that a lot of communities use to create affordability in those units. So the HUD, so the Department of Housing and Urban Development, basically says that if you pay 30% or less of your income towards housing, that is affordable housing. And so the goal is that if someone were to move into one of these sites, that they would be contributing 30% of their income. And then we have the housing voucher to cover the remaining up to what market rate would be. And that could help contribute to operations and services.
Great. So we have a question in the chat that's kind of specific. So if a property included motel units and a restaurant and an owner residential unit, would it be possible to retain that owner residency in the restaurant as a commercial operation? And maybe the restaurant could even be providing food service for the residents.
You know, that's a really good question and sounds very specific. I do know one of the projects we looked at before, there was a restaurant actually involved. And so I think that there was funding in the original Homekey that would have allowed for basically that business to relocate. I mean, the state wants to make sure that they're not just displacing businesses or other folks. So I can definitely follow back up and make sure that what I'm saying is accurate. But I do want to just say, moving forward, I think what was interesting about the process last time, especially as we get into like very specific projects and kind of nuances from site to site, is that the state was pretty flexible after applications to work with us to kind of, troubleshoot the unique needs of each site. So if there was a project that was proposed with that kind of configuration that was described, if everything checked out and it seemed like it could be a viable project for housing, but there was this kind of extra layer involved, I think what the state has signaled, at least with Homekey 1.0, is apply, and then we'll work together to try to figure it out.
Great. And then there was a question about if Novato has a homeless oversight committee that community members can join, kind of like you mentioned for Corte Madera.
I don't know. I do know that I think it was earlier this week, the Novato Council created a homeless subcommittee, which I believe is Mayor Eklund as well as Councilmember Warnick. So I know that is, I think, a new structure or subcommittee for the Novato City Council. But right now, at least what I described with Corte Madera, that's a very specific advisory committee related to the Homekey project. So that is the only place where that exists right now. But it's something that, let's say, if there was a hypothetical future Novato Homekey site, we could certainly recreate that anywhere else. I think it's been a really good model.
Great. Okay, another question. Under Homekey 2.0 as proposed now, would the county still be able to acquire property located within city and town limits without having to receive official approval from that local city or town government?
Yes, that goes back to the question, or what I was mentioning earlier about the local land use part of the legislation. So basically, the underlying state legislation said that for a Homekey project, if it's, let's say again, so I think a very concrete example is 3301 Kerner, which was the San Rafael project. So that zoning in San Rafael was canal light industrial. And so basically the Homekey, in a typical environment, that would have required a general plan amendment, which probably would have taken about a year to process. But because of Homekey, that basically allowed the applicant or the possible owner, which in this case was the county, to come in and basically it automatically qualified as housing. That was like a state decision that superseded anything local. So if Project Homekey 2.0 is the same as Project Homekey 1.0, then in terms of this question, yes, there would be that same kind of expedited land use process. And again, I think the other thing that's important is, as I mentioned in Homekey 1.0, the county was the lead applicant and the owner. But I think at this stage of the game, there's openness to if individual cities and towns want to be the owner, or if there wants to be a co-application, that's certainly not out of the question. So I think that's because we have more time to think about this, we can have kind of more nuanced partnerships around possible sites.
Great, thank you. And we have we're getting a lot of great questions today, so thank you for being so engaged. Another one is we are a local affordable housing association. If we work with Project Homekey to acquire 8 units in our community for permanent supportive housing, could that housing eventually become regular affordable housing?
That's a good question. And I think what's interesting is that, we spent a lot of time in this presentation talking about permanent supportive housing and chronic homelessness. What's interesting about Homekey is that it does not necessarily require a focus on chronic homelessness. There could be, let's say, for example, a project that's more focused on families. What's key is that a lot of our service dollars are tied to really vulnerable people. So we need to make sure that if we're providing housing that has supportive services, that we have funding streams attached, so we're not setting people up to not be successful. So I would basically say, it sounds like in this case, there might be a very specific project in mind. This would be a good way to submit this through the survey. And then we can talk more about what are the particular details there. But basically, I think from the state's point of view, as long as the housing is long-term, restricted affordable housing, whether that's for homelessness or homelessness prevention or something like that, there's flexibility there.
Great. And then there was a question about the vehicle count. This is a follow-up to the question about legalized camping. The county just noted that the number of people living in vehicles has almost doubled in the most recent vehicle count. Andrew, do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to?
Do you want to start first, and then I'm happy to?
Yeah, so we are concerned definitely about the increase in people living in vehicles. And we do know that when people begin to experience homelessness, often they will start by living in vehicles. That's a very common first step in homelessness, unfortunately. So what we would have liked to have done our complete point in time count, the count that I mentioned before of people who are visible on the streets on a given night. But because of COVID, we weren't able to do that safely. So instead, we did something conceptually similar, but with a pretty different methodology of a count of vehicles. And that was done, people living in vehicles only. And that was done recently. And those are the statistics that were just released. And I think that's what this comment is referring to. So yes, we're aware of it, and we are concerned about it, and this is why our efforts to end chronic homelessness, we have all the more steam behind our effort to continue this work. Andrew, I'll let you.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And the other thing that I would just add is that, again, we spent a lot of time talking about permanent supportive housing and chronic homelessness. But if you remember that kind of spectrum that I showed you at the very beginning of the presentation, from basically, temporarily homeless to more episodic to long-term, and even before being homeless, like on the verge of homelessness, precariously housed, there are different kind of interventions that we're pursuing at every level. So the county, for example, has been running a rental assistance program for people who were on the verge of potentially losing their housing because of COVID and income loss. That program just got an additional $16 million from the state. So that's kind of like homelessness prevention. For people that are more newly homeless, and again, this is kind of what Karis was talking about, a lot of people that are in their vehicles, I think the general kind of research around it is that they're most or more recently homeless because they still have that possession, and that's really what they have left. We also got a multi-million-dollar grant from the federal government for what's called rapid rehousing. And so that's a program where it's more short-term housing assistance and case management, with the goal of getting people kind of restabilized and then back kind of more self-sufficient on their own. And then again, for people that have like really complex needs, that's where we're focused for permanent supportive housing. So basically, to answer your question, yes, it's definitely concerning that a lot of new people are on the street, for sure. And I think what's positive, at least, is that there's been a lot of new resources funneling to our community to help people. Maybe it's not acquiring new housing, but there's money available for them to hopefully get back inside.
So Andrew, I know we don't have too much time left, but I think this question is super important. Is there a reason for projects to be completed with only 3 months time? It's just so short.
Yeah, I saw that question. That's a really wonderful question. So my understanding from Homekey 1.0 is that, as I mentioned, it was reallocated federal dollars that came down to the state of California. That's how the state paid for it. There was a general fund allocation, but I think it was only like $50 million or $100 million. And then there was also some statewide philanthropic, but most of it, I want to say 500 or 600 million, was federal. And that was basically use it or lose it funding by the end of calendar year 2020. So that was why the state was like, you got to use the money because we're not going to have the money come January 1. And so this time around, I don't know if those same requirements are in place for the state, but I think that they've seen how successful it was to actually, given the very rapid time constraint, communities could actually pull this off. So I think maybe that's why it's going to continue, even if it's funded from the general fund. The other thing about being occupied so quickly is again, I think the intention was, no one really knew how long the pandemic was going to last. I mean, we're still in it. And so they wanted to get people inside as rapidly as possible. They didn't just want communities to buy a site and then have it sit unoccupied. They wanted people moving in as fast as possible. So that too has created a lot of challenges, and again, a lot of credit to the county for kind of bending over backwards to try to make it happen. But yeah, it's fast for sure.
All right, I'm just going to try to squeeze one or two more in. Is that okay, Andrew?
Yeah, sure.
We have a question about how do these permanent supportive housing initiatives not create a vacuum that draws additional homeless people to Marin from other areas? And I really appreciate this question because a lot of people have this in mind. And it's kind of amazing. The research that we've done in Marin is that really the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness in Marin are from Marin. They grew up here. They went to our high schools. They are part of our families that have been in Marin for a long time. And I'll let Andrew add to that. But I think in general, yes, that is a concern that you could imagine. And we haven't seen that happening.
Absolutely. I think it's a good question. We have not seen that happen. I think a lot of the people that are experiencing chronic homelessness they have very long stories in our community. And I also just I just stumbled on this earlier this week because it's actually brand new. The state has been working on creating a statewide dashboard to better paint a picture, quantifiable picture of homelessness in the state. And based on the link here that you can look at, according to their reporting, 96% of people who access services in a given California county, it was only that one touch in that one county. There wasn't multiple access points across multiple counties. So I found that honestly like staggeringly high. In the Bay Area, we find that 70 to 85% of people who are homeless in our communities lost their housing in that county. So this is just some more information for that. And then I also see, sorry.
Sorry, we're just at the end, but I just wanted to say a couple things. Keep in mind that the state hasn't actually released this officially yet, so all these answers were our best guesses. And if you have follow-up questions we didn't have time to answer, you can email Andrew and I. I know there was one about Project Homekey and one about encampments that we didn't get to. And if you have time, Andrew, the last question was, are tax credits the only option for rehab funding?
Yeah, I'll answer that question. And then again, like Kara said, feel free to reach out with other questions. No, tax credits are not the only option. In fact, the Corte Madera project did not use tax credits. Part of the reason was that hotel had been recently rehabbed anyway. And so the only real rehab that needs to happen is to add kitchenettes, I think. So that was a low enough cost that could be absorbed locally. But for a lot of more substantial rehabs, yes, I think tax credits are going to be necessary. So that is, again, another factor of, if a project is like, we got to completely rebuild it, that adds a lot of cost and might not be able to pursue.
Well,
And, thank you, Mark. Yeah.
Please do fill out the survey, and thank you to everybody.
Yes, I will paste the survey one final time in the chat just so it's fresh for you. So if you haven't already, please, you can follow this link and complete the survey. And also feel free to share this with your network as well for people that couldn't attend.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for taking the time. Bye.